Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's ISE webinar. I'm trying not to call it a webinar because it's a bit longer than the usual format for us. We've got 90 minutes of content, got some great speakers lined up. If you've seen the LinkedIn post today, you'll have seen that we produced a report, the future of early careers. It's building on the work that we've been doing for the last 12 to 18 months. And it's about how the early career sector evolves into what we're calling emerging talent. And this really for 2025, this is the first session in a whole raft of content that we're going to be producing. We're covering pretty broad strokes. Today, we're going to be hearing from the educator's point of view. We've got Stuart from University of Bristol joining us. We've got Robert from Arctic Shores and Nikki from Capfinity talking about skills, etc., and the solution provider perspective. And then we're ending up with Charlotte from Rolls-Royce, very much an organisation that is embracing skills thinking in their approach. And then throughout the year, whether it's webinars, podcasts, reports, we're going to be going into a lot more deep dive on the various subjects. So my name is Steve Ishwood. If you're new to the ISE, you don't know who we are, very briefly. We are a members organisation, very much focused on the early career space, been around for about 50 years, historically graduates, but of course, as the landscape has changed over recent years, particularly through things like the apprentice levy, we're much broader in terms of that definition of student hiring and development. We've got about 500 members, about 300 employers who are members, about 90 universities, and then about 120 solution providers. So we're a pretty broad church in this organisation. Normally our webinars are for members only. Obviously, we're a members organisation, and the reports are, but we've opened this up because we think this is such an important subject for our sector. We want to reach as many people as possible. I'm going to do roughly 10 to 15 minutes just positioning this in terms of what we think the main forces are, and then we'll very much go into our speaker content for the rest of the session. So if I share my screen, I'll get us started. Hopefully you should all be able to see that. So yes, as I said, my name's Steve Ishwood. I'm joint CEO at the ISE, and I'm responsible for knowledge and insights. And as I said, this work is a culmination of a decision that we made as an organisation roughly 18 months to 2 years ago, actually to start thinking about this broader landscape in which early careers professionals are starting to operate. And as I go through the next 10 minutes, for those of you that are new to this, you'll see all the forces, etc., that we're talking about that are driving that. This is a very broad subject. So as you can see there, I've listed on the left-hand side of this slide, actually, the areas where we think our industry is going to be impacted. And we haven't got the time today to cover all those in depth. The report that you can see there goes into them a bit more detail. If you haven't seen it yet, if you go onto the ISE website, ise.org.uk, click on the Knowledge Hub and click on Future of Early Talent, and you'll get access to all our Future of Early Talent content, but that report there. So let me start with what I think are the two big forces that are driving this change and why it's so important to our sector. Anybody that has seen me speak before on this will know that I always start with demographics. I'm trying to change the images that I use just so that you don't get bored with the pyramids that I'm showing.
Stephen,
sorry,
Steve,
Steve.
Yes, sorry, Robert.
It's not showing.
yeah.
Ah, right. Oh, sorry. Telling me. That's because I didn't click the share button. It's because I'm using a monitor on my laptop. Thanks for that. Can you all see that now?
Yep.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. Right. So population. So population, declining birth rate, and we're all living longer. Those are the two big forces that are changing the shape of the labour force in the UK. The particular graph you can see at the moment is taking the male and female population from the last census, 2022, and projecting what that's due to look like to 2032. Birth rates declining are one of those significant forces. In the early careers sector, dealing with students, we're a little bit protected from that at the moment because the number of 18-year-olds coming out of the system is still on the increase. But when you track through from when birth rates started to decline, the number of 18-year-olds in about 5 years' time is going to start falling. which obviously changes the number of people available to enter the labour market. And then, of course, we're all living longer and are therefore working longer. So actually, there are more older people in the workplace. I was at a meeting last week. There was somebody there representing the Migration Advisory Committee. He made quite an interesting comment that one of the things they look at when thinking about sectors that are asking for preferential treatment around visas, well, they look at, does that industry actually have active practices to employ older workers? He made the interesting point that the retirement age is now 67, so they expect employers to be thinking about age groups up to that point. So these are big forces changing the labour markets. They really our proposition is that they can't be ignored, and these immovable forces actually, as they start to play out over time, if we as an industry don't think about them, actually we're going to find significant changes available in those talent pools. If it wasn't for net migration, that's net migration, an increase in people coming into the UK, actually the UK population would be in overall decline. I think it was last year was the first time there were more deaths in the UK than there were births. I think the UK birth rate is around 1.5 children. Which is below the replacement rate. So the only reason that actually the number of people in the working age population is going to increase over the coming years is through immigration. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So that's the big piece around demographics, changing actually the nature of the talent that is out there and available to you. The other force that we see changing the nature of work is actually the nature of work itself. AI is a big part of that. We're going to be talking about that a bit later. But also actually the UK as a country, all the projections show that actually we are going to need more people in more higher skilled roles. And I'll explain a bit more of that in a moment. For this report, I did some work looking at actually the size of the UK workforce going right back to 1994 and extrapolating those predictions out to 2044. And when you look at that line, I think it's really interesting because we would have to zoom in really closely to see the impact of things like the financial crash of COVID. They just don't factor in the long run. As a whole, employers are increasing the number of workers that they need, despite technology change, despite offshoring. I mean, the quote is becoming probably a little bit of a cliche now, but that AI won't take your job, but somebody who use it can, I think encapsulates what tends to happen with changing technology. Jobs change, but actually as a whole, employers plan for growth. Growth generally requires more people. So all the evidence is that despite a decline in population, employers are going to need more people to actually do the work that their markets require. The other challenge, of course, is the education piece and the skills piece, and we could do a whole session in terms of actually policies and practices around that. Our apprentice conference that we had on Tuesday, I know some of you on this webinar were at that. That was the highest attendance ever for an apprentice conference, and I think that is a reflection on how important that is as a subject. This particular graph here is data that I pulled together again for the report, and it shows three things. One is actually the nature of jobs at the moment and the jobs that actually the skills people should have to do those jobs. And then it compares that to what that might look like in 2035. And it also compares that to the current qualification profile of the population in the UK. So if you look at that orange bar, level 4 and above, if you don't know what levels mean, level 4 and above is everything above A level and beyond, so includes degrees, postgraduate type qualification. And remember, level is by the qualification level, the skill level needed to do that job, not necessarily the specific qualification that somebody holds. So we can see there that actually as work becomes more complex, the skill level required to do that work increases. There is not much change in the makeup of lower skilled work. But what the grey bar shows on those is the really significant difference in qualification levels compared to the labour market. So there is a little bit of overqualification in the labour market. There is some truth in that if you look at the World Economic Forum's data. But actually the main story is that actually as a country, the UK, whether it's through the education system or its employers directly, we're not investing enough in the skills that the country needs for the work that the labour market requires. Unless we do something about it, that problem is only going to get worse. We could again go into a lot more detail, of course, sector by sector. Each sector will be affected differently by the changes in technology. This slide here, again, it's data taken from the report, shows the situation now in terms of where the roles are and where the projections are for the next 10 years. And you can see there that it is mostly higher skilled roles, STEM roles, business professional roles, managerial type level roles, health sector roles. That's where the increase. There is some increase in lower skilled work. That's particularly areas like the care sector. But overall, the biggest decline are in lower skilled roles. One of the big declines is expected to be in business administration type roles. That's one area we think AI will have an impact. So again, if you're thinking about that as an organization and the work your current workforce is doing, that might be some of the roles you think about in terms of upskilling and reskilling people. So in summary, we could go into, again, we could do a whole session on labour market dynamics. But in summary, we've only got 16.5 million people in England, Wales educated to level 4 and above. But even at the moment, even in a relatively tough economic climate that we're in at the moment, we've got over 18 million jobs actually at that level, expected to rise to 23 million over the next 10 years. So you do the sums, and over the next 10 years, the UK needs 3 to 4 million people in work, predominantly in those higher skilled roles. But actually, the working age population, including that immigration data I showed you, is actually only predicted to increase by around about 1.14 million. So you don't need to be a data expert to realise where the crunch is coming there. Interestingly, it's the over 70s that are going to increase by a greater number than the working age population. So that shows the impact of that ageing workforce. So I'm not intending to spend a lot of time on government policy in this, but when you look at what's happening at government policy, when you look at actually the governments and if you look at what they're thinking about doing with the growth and skills levy, you can understand why there is that focus on those 9 million who are currently of working age population, but aren't economically active. They're economically inactive. They're not officially unemployed. And then you've got nearly 1 million young people who are currently classified as NEET. So if you don't know what NEET is, that's not in education or training. So all this is the background to what's driving this thing called the skills-based organisation. There has been a lot of information and a lot of reports and a lot of noise out there around skills-based organisation. Again, we won't go that into detail here, but the ingredients in a skills-based organisation are the increased importance of strategic workforce planning. If you like the idea of listening to whispers to see where changes are coming from, there's a lot more talk around strategic workforce planning than there used to be a few years ago. Mapping the skills that an organisation needs is really important. Having tech stacks that work across the organisation infrastructure, identifying the skills that a current workforce has, where those needs are, where they might be in the external labour force. How you coordinate HR and talent attraction strategies in a much better way. And of course, the big cultural change that goes along with this and the senior leadership that needs to drive it. The Deloitte report is very good on this. There's a number of other reports out there. Again, if you look at the ISE report out today, one of the appendices actually has a whole bunch of resources that you can look at, and that Deloitte's report is in there. So there's plenty of stuff out there you can read to dive into increase your knowledge on this. We did a survey last summer of ISE members who were interested in this whole skills-based movement to ask where they were at. Interestingly, a very small percentage said, actually, this is not an approach we're considering, we're not interested. But only 10% said this is an approach that they fully adopt. By far, nearly 70% of employers said they're either partially adopting this approach already, or it's something they're very much looking to do. So what we found with this piece of work, and this very much defines the ISE approach, there aren't a series of case studies out there where you can say, oh, look, they've done it. will do the same. The ISE is just going to populate our conferences and events with that kind of content. I might be stealing Charlotte's thunder a little bit, who's talking later. Charlotte said in the session we did the back end of last year around flying the plane as you're building it, and that's very much the sense we get from employers. They're trying to work out what this all means at the moment. And we think skills is really at the heart of that. The next session that we do online around this is going to focus a lot more on skills, because skills as a word is shorthand, but it is quite a complex thing when we talk about skills. In the report, for to aid understanding, we've talked about behavioural skills, cognitive skills, technical skills. Nikki a bit later might talk a little bit more about that, because lots of things called skills, capabilities, attributes are within this debate. So we're not saying that the need for technical skills will go away. This is the World Economic Forum data. These are the skills, and this is UK specific data that organisations are going to need more of by 2030. So there is the technical skills out there, but look at the 62% figure and the 59% figure. That's much more behavioural skills, resilience, flexibility, dealing with a changing environment, being able to learn, being adaptable and flexible. And that's something we're really interested in terms of actually how we might develop that in the work that we do, whether that's as employers working within the education system. We're going to hear from Stuart very, very shortly around the work that Bristol are doing that plays to that agenda. And one of the things I'm really interested in is around this idea of the scaffolding around skills, because I think there's a danger with the word skills. We oversimplify things. Teamwork skills, you need that in a role. Well, if a student does a group exercise, they've got teamwork skills, they can tick the box. And as we all know, working in teams, dealing with people is a lifelong learning experience. So we're quite keen to understand that a little bit more. And again, that's something we're going to go into a lot more detail this year. But just to close off before we go on to our first speaker today. You might be sat there thinking, well, is this just all consulting speak? This looks great on a slide deck. It's nice to talk about. It's an interesting thought exercise. Is it actual reality? Well, I think one of the reasons that actually maybe some of these issues aren't as pressing as they could be is we are in a pretty low growth environment at the moment. The ISE is expecting student vacancies only to grow by about 1% this year. But go back to the summer of 2022 when we had that marvellous heat wave, and I look back at the CIPD's mid-year labour market report. Pretty much half of employers had hard to fill vacancies. Employers were talking about retention, upskilling existing staff because they just couldn't find them in the labour market. Employers talking about reshaping their employee value proposition, about enabling actually more flexible ways to keep people in their organisations. So our belief is that very much once that growth returns to the economy, that squeeze is very much going to hit. And organisations who aren't thinking about this at the moment are going to find themselves pretty much caught short. Right, so that's enough from me. That's very much a very quick overall summary in terms of both what the report covers, but also what we want to be going to in a lot more detail, both on this session and also in the year to come. Really pleased to have our first speaker, Stuart from University of Bristol. Been doing a bit of work with Stuart recently. I'm really impressed with what Bristol are doing. I think they're a really good example of actually how a university is embracing the skills agenda, and actually the work they're doing very much feeds into this broader labour market piece, and I think is something that's a sector that shows lots of potential for employers to engage with and other kind of institutions to embrace. So Stuart, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Can you hear me? Okay?
I can hear you loud and clear. Yeah. Do you want to introduce yourself and kick in? You're going to talk us through a few slides, aren't you? I should just say, for those on the webinar, please do use the chat. Also use the Q&A function. I'll be keeping an eye on that. Each of our speakers has got some time at the end to answer questions from the audience. So we'll try and answer many of those as much as possible. Stuart, over to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so my name's Stuart Johnson. I'm Director of Careers and Skills at the University of Bristol. And as Stephen said, we've been working together a little on skills, and in particular the Bristol skills framework, which we've been going at for a couple of years now. I feel a bit of a novice on Zoom, by the way, because we're all teams here at Bristol. So if I make any errors, I apologise, but I've managed to share my screen, so that's a good one. And I think I might have been responsible for Stephen not sharing his screen earlier because I was sort of practicing, and I think I might have overridden things. So apologies, Stephen. Anyway, Stephen's asked me to chat through our approach to essential skills development at Bristol. So I'll do that, and then there'll be some time for questions. So this is the outline, to talk to you briefly about the Bristol Skills Profile. Then secondly, the journey that we've been going on about developing this integrated campus-wide approach. And that's very much a journey that we're still on rather than somewhere where we've kind of arrived. Importantly, thirdly, the opportunities for employer integration and collaboration. And then finally, what the data is telling us about the approach. I don't think I'll be able to keep an eye on chat as we go through this. So if there's anything in the chat that is worth interrupting me for, then somebody please shout out, Stephen. Perhaps that would be useful. So the Bristol Skills Profile, what is it? So but before explaining what it is, I want to kind of explain how we came up with the list of skills. Stephen's already referred to the World Economic Forum. And when we were coming up with a list of skills, it was the Future Jobs Report at the time of 2020, because we were developing this in 2022, I think. That was the most useful source of information for us. We looked at lots of different things, but it was only really the World Economic Forum's report, which were looking at future skills. So in the 2020 report, they had top 10 skills of 2025, which obviously we're in now, but felt like quite a while away at that point. And so we lent in heavily to that report in particular. The 2023 report that came out shortly after we developed our list of skills basically confirmed our approach. And many of you will know that there's been another report only last month, the 2025 report. And that too has confirmed our approach. So we're pleased that we've been making use of that. It talks about analytical thinking remaining the most sought after skill, but resilience, flexibility, agility, along with leadership and social influence. AI and big data, unsurprisingly, topping the list of fastest growing skills, but also then a couple of really technical things: network, cybersecurity, and technological literacy, but also complementing those, some overlap with creative thinking, resilience, flexibility, and so on. So we feel like we're on the right lines with the kind of skills that we're asking our students to develop. But what is it then? So the Bristol Skills Profile are the 9 skills that we want all students at Bristol to develop. And it's accompanied by the My Skills platform, which is the place where students can reflect on and record their skills. And importantly, those are 2 different things. And if I was to represent this as a Venn diagram, the Bristol Skills Profile would be the whole thing, and the My Skills platform would be entirely a subset of it. And the platform isn't an end in itself, importantly. It's more about the general approach to teaching, education, assessment at Bristol, plus, of course, the extracurricular experience as well. So what are these list of skills? And I think Stephen might have listed this on the event invite, that we've arranged it under these 3 headings of what will I learn, what will I be able to do, and what will I become. And the reason for that is because our education at Bristol is increasingly leaning into this particular theory of education by some researchers at Warwick called Barnett and Coates, where they talk about education being about knowing, acting and being, or knowing, doing and being. And clearly universities, particularly research intensives, have a long history of helping people to know stuff, but the doing or the acting and the being is important as well. And sometimes that's referred to as head, hands and heart, knowing, acting and being. But those are quite abstract terms, aren't they? So we've used them instead as questions. What will I learn? What will I be able to do? And what will I become? And this links into intended learning outcomes. It links into our assessment methodologies. It connects with our program approval process. So it's threaded through all sorts of different things that we're doing. So what will I learn? Academic skills, research skills, knowledge handling skills. What will I be able to do? Work well independently, work well with others, and work well across communities. And then finally, what will I become? Proactive about my well-being, clear about my direction, and ready for the future. So those are the, when we talk about 9 skills, those are they. But as you might expect, we've been a bit cheeky and developed some sub-skills as well, and those are here. So I'm not going to go through these in any detail, but each of those 9 skills has 3 sub-skills, so 27 altogether. But just to highlight a couple, just to explain some of our thinking: recover from difficulties and setbacks, recognize and value the views and differences of others. We've opted to describe the skills in kind of a conversational way, rather than just use single words. So, for instance, recover from difficulties and setbacks is resilience. Recognize and value the views and differences of others is inclusion. But both of those terms mean slightly different things to different people. They can be quite loaded, and they're not particularly conversational. So if you were, imagine being a personal tutor, chatting to your tutee, if you were to say, how is your resilience? That probably wouldn't elicit a very helpful response. It's too confrontational. Whereas if you were to ask that as a reflective question, so how do you recover from difficulties and setbacks, you stand more of a chance of making good progress on that. I think I've highlighted a few others here as well. So yes, confident in using digital tools. The reason I highlighted that was because at no point do we specify which tools. So the whole kind of framework is deliberately subject agnostic, and then it's up to the disciplines to contextualize it. So for instance, the digital tools you might use in history are clearly very different to the digital tools you'd use in physics. And so we deliberately don't specify them. That's up to the academics and others to do that. And then finally, I think I just highlighted knowledge handling and ready for the future, because those are 2 particularly important things from the World Economic Forum Future Jobs reports that I mentioned previously. So those are the skills. And then this is the skills check. So this is Target Connect, produced by Group GTI. This is just me doing a little screen share in real time of how our little system works. And so a student would do a skills check. Thankfully, I'm not at the beginning of this. I've got the last 3. So this is confident using digital tools, and students choose between developing, competent, proficient, and advanced. And we co-develop these statements with students so that they would be comfortable with them. This next one's about ready to adapt to new technologies, I think. And then finally, must have been something different. Anyway, this final one is about adapting to changing and challenging environments. So once you've completed that, and we think it takes about 20 minutes, or we know it does for most students, you get a kind of readout of what your skills profile is. You can add reflections, you can pin different skills you want to work on, and you also get a visual representation of what your skills profile looks like. So that's a little bit about how one aspect of the tool works. So how are we integrating this at Bristol? So this is the timeline. This is what I kind of hinted at some of already. So it was the academic year before last when we started to do the development work. We piloted it last year, and then now we're in the kind of rollout and consolidation phase. So we've been at this for a couple of years now. Yeah. So, and then what we've done is made sure that this links to our university strategy, and this has been really helpful for us. So these are our 10 goals for the university strategy, and ensuring students gain the future skills they need to thrive in a changing world are is key to our university strategy. So that's really important hook for us to make use of. But there are other bits of the strategy as well, that skills development are important to. So attracting and inspiring students, accelerating and supporting enterprise, contributing to Bristol's economy and society, and fostering well-being. So, sorry, I'm getting a bit distracted by questions in chat, but I'll try not to click on those, and someone, again, let me know if I need to pick them up before I finish.
I'll keep an eye on the Q&A and the chat.
Sorry,
so don't you worry, I've got that on my screen.
Yeah. Again, this is me not being used to Zoom, so sorry. So yeah, and really importantly, I mean, you're not careers folk, you're really talent folk. But to careers colleagues, it's really important that they know we're talking about skills, not employability skills. Career services are a bit obsessive about employability skills, I think. But it's much easier to talk about it as skills. You immediately include a much wider audience, and on all of those skills of the 9 skills that we're getting students to develop are employability skills. We just don't need to express them as such. So that's been an important part of what we're doing as well. And then last academic year, we did some pilots within faculties, within pre-sessional training, skills units, intended learning outcomes, and then in extracurricular settings as well, sports, exercise and health, our students' union, and so on. And then we did a big launch to staff in November, the year before last. So we had a room full of a couple of hundred people where we launched the skills profile to them, which went down really well, was a big success. We had different perspectives from employers, academics, students. And then we've also launched it to students as well. We actually had a new Instagram video this week that is student content generated, but this was one from last year from Leah, who is working with us in careers, helping students to understand how the things that they're doing, whether that's in the curricular or in the co-curricular space, are developing their skills. And then in this rollout phase that I mentioned we're in now, we've got some philanthropic funding to do some targeted support for different schools. The first 10 of these are in an academic context. Then our Institute of Learning and Teaching is about training academics within careers, and the Students' Union around volunteering. So lots of different places where this is now getting embedded in some really interesting things. So anthropology and archaeology is a heritage project within the city. Dentistry is their response to the British Dental Council's new professional skills framework. There's lots of different places where it's rolling out, which is helpful. And then penultimately, and the data bit will be brief, and then will be time for questions, is the employer integration. We also launched it to employers, and Stephen was at this event. Actually, we did this in May the year before last. Importantly, jointly with our combined authority, the West of England Combined Authority, or WECA, as it's often known as. And it's been really helpful to have WECA's backing for this because they're interested in making sure that graduates in the city, not just from Bristol, but from University of West of England and other institutions, are providing employers with the talent pipelines that they need with skilled graduates. So things that you can be thinking about, you'll know this, I'm sure, so I'll deal with it very quickly, but connecting with your university careers teams that you're interested in, identifying what kind of engagement that would support your objectives, highlighting the skills that you recruit for, importantly, using language and accessible language and tangible examples, and then finally tailoring your engagement to meet your objectives. And then finally from me, before we have questions, what's the data telling us? Well, there's a number of different sources of data, and we haven't yet been able to join all of these up because they're different snapshots. So the MySkills data is our platform, which is real time, or at least backs up every night. The NSS, the National Student Survey, happens every year with final year students, and then the Graduate Outcome Survey also happens every year, but 15 months after graduation. And so we can't yet follow a single cohort through, but we think it will be really useful to be able to join this data up. And then I think what I've done, if this works, is do a little screen share here of our Power BI dashboard for this. This was a couple of weeks ago. We're now up to nearly 10%, but this was, I think, just under 2,900 students at that time had completed 3,300, I think, skills checks. We can look at the percentage across each faculty. This is the view here. And this pop-up is the number of skills checks, 3,320 at the time. Again, that's nearer 3,500, I think. You can look at it by school. So the spike is dentistry because they're using it very heavily in response to the General Dental Council and other schools as well that are big users of it. But there are other views within this that are helpful. So you can look at skills levels. So these are the 9 skills and how students are performing on them across developing, competent, proficient, and advanced. You can toggle between early and later and see that student skills are progressing. And I think also in here, I can't remember what I clicked on when I recorded this video. Oh, yes, you can cut it by different things, levels of study, academic program, disability, those kind of things. And then this was me looking at particular skills, knowledge handling skills here, and then seeing the spread across developing, competent, proficient, and advanced. And if you look at it over year group, first year, second year, third year, so you can ignore the final column for the time being, you can see that the the number of students who are becoming more proficient is increasing, and the ones who are only saying are developing is decreasing across all the levels. Now, we've only been doing this 2 years, so we can't claim that's all down to the Bristol Skills Profile, but you can see that there's some useful data for us to make use of as we progress through. So I think that's the video over, and I can now stop sharing my screen and see what's going on, because it feels like I've been flying blind. So yeah, back to you,
That's all right.
Steve.
I'm the same. When I use Zoom, it always throws me a little bit because so used to doing Teams. That was great, Stuart. Really, thank you very much for going through that. I probably should say, just to those in the audience listening who might be at another university who are also doing similar work, we are aware that other universities are available. So, and we will be featuring some of those institutions later in the year, hopefully, as we go into some of these subjects in a bit more detail. We've had a couple of questions, Stuart. Just before I get to those, and actually it probably relates to Victoria's question around, did you use the Skills Builder framework? So I guess there's a twofold question. One is, where did you get your data from to inform those skills? And also, I remember you saying to me that you've not used the word skills sometimes, because actually sometimes that word is a bit problematic for what you're talking about. So can you talk to us a little bit about that? You've gone on mute, Stuart.
Sorry, yes, because I was having a drink. Yeah, so where we got the skills from, as we've said, we lent heavily into the World Economic Forum data, but we also looked at data on Wonky did some interesting research with Adobe, I think. The Office for Students had commissioned some research, Quality Assurance Agency Scotland, conversations with employers, particularly our local composites catapult locally, the National Composites Centre. So it was that informed these, but really importantly, it was co-created too. So we did ask employer. Well, if I was to rank these, the people who were most informative were employers. Secondly, we were also interested in what academics thought, although we needed to use language that was useful for future employment. And we were interested in what students said, but not specifically about which skills, because we felt they didn't know what they didn't know, kind of thing. But we really wanted to hear from them in terms of the language we used to express it. So that's where we did the co-creation on those statements of developing competent, proficient, and advanced, and where we had some fascinating conversations about things that I wasn't even aware of. Students came up with around the whole proactive about my well-being. Some students talked a lot about the idea of toxic positivity, the idea if you're too positive all the time, that can just make you feel worse. So we knew that well-being was important to be on there, especially for Bristol, but we wanted to express it in a way that students felt they could relate to. Sorry, and I've now forgotten the second half of your question, which I think was data related.
No, skills. It was actually because you said to me at some point, actually, I can't remember in what context. Yeah, the language and being careful when you use the word skills and when not to.
I think it was more about avoiding the word employability skills, really, because the skills is the language the government's using. It's the language that our regulator, the Office for Students, is using, and we have sort of kind of stuck with that, I think, because it can get confusing talking about competencies or attributes or these kind of things. So we've just kept it simple and kept with skills and avoided being more specific than that. So we've avoided I don't know, study skills or employability skills, because it's about capturing a wider audience.
Got it. Thanks. And related to that is another question in the Q&A, which is around, did you find any patterns yet around which subjects connected which of the 9 skills? So the example that the question has asked is languages, for example, being more resistant to tech, etc.
Yeah, I don't think we dug into that detail enough yet, and I'm a little bit reluctant to do that until we get much more uptake. So with 10% of the cohort now having done a skills check, that's good for something that's entirely optional and not mandated. But until we get to more than that, we're being a little bit careful. However, because it's more than 50% now, I think for dentistry, that is something we could look at and begin to sort of see what the patterns are. So it depends. It depends how you cut it. I'm sure there will be examples where certain programs are better at teaching problem solving skills, for instance, or um, 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 those kind of things. But it hasn't yet, as far as we can tell, fallen along kind of stereotypical lines. And I think one of the reasons for that is that this thing about wanting academics to contextualize it. So it would be an oversimplification to think that historians don't use digital skills, for instance. They often do because they're dealing with huge amounts of data and having to summarize and understand that. And so that's where it becomes important that academics in particular can contextualize it for their disciplines.
Yes, that the second event I came to yours just before Christmas, I think two things stuck in my mind. One was actually the broad representation you had across campus in the room, which was great, just the volume of people there. And I think it was a law school academic on one of the round tables. And what struck me was she wasn't talking about this as a careers thing or an employability thing. Actually,
Yeah.
the context she was talking was actually, it was just about how they taught law. It was about
Mm.
what law meant as a career, and it was a fully integrated approach. And I kind of thought that to me sounds like the holy grail. It's not this thing over
Yeah,
here that you have to go and do with it's it's embedded
yeah.
in your study and how you do things.
It's often about active learning as much as anything else. So, which for a Russell Group institution is slightly more unusual. For other institutions, it will be more day to day. But yeah, that's why this categorization of knowing, acting, and being has been helpful to us, because it's not just about imparting knowledge, which you can very easily just find yourself now. It's the appropriating and understanding of that knowledge, and it helping you to do things and become things as well. And so that's been helpful. And where courses are largely taught by lectures and assessed by essays, you have very little scope for surfacing the skills that are in there. But as soon as both the teaching and assessment becomes more creative, more interesting, there are far more opportunities to surface the skills very naturally that exist within the program. So it jars less, and it feels much less like your course has been hijacked to teach you a particular skill. You just surface it, and it's Kate Daubney's work, who was previously at King's, who did some brilliant pioneering of that concept of unearthing the skills that are already there rather than trying to cram more in.
All right, great. One quick question, then we'll need to move on that's left in the Q&A. Just out of interest for the audience, I can see there's some stuff in the chat. I can keep an eye on the Q&A, but not the chat and the Q&A at the same time. So, but one last question in the Q&A for Stuart, then we'll move on. So, question from Alistair. So, Alistair said, "Is the My Skills program compulsory for students? And if not, what's the take up?"
Yeah, so it's not yet. Our Deputy Vice Chancellor would like to make it compulsory. At the moment, I'm resisting that, which might seem a little bit peculiar, but as soon as you mandate it, it alters how people interact with it, because they're filling it in because they've been told to, rather than they're filling it in because they want to develop their skills. So if and when, and I think it's probably when we get over 50%, we might begin to mandate it in different ways. I'm now leading on a personal tutoring project within the university, and that's probably the place in which we will make it much more commonplace. Yeah, to use the dentistry example, but also Italian, strangely, and bits of engineering have really kind of pushed it, and it's been getting lots of interest. So that's helpful.
Smashing. Thank you, Stuart. That was great. Thank you very much. Really gives a really good insight into the excellent work you're doing at
No problem.
Bristol. Cool. Talk to you again, Stuart. Thank you very much, and thanks for joining us today, because I know you're out and about. So much appreciated for taking the time. Thank you. Right, so now we're going to move on to the middle section of today's session, where I'm going to be joined by Robert and Nikki. So solutions, the solutions that our sector uses, whether it's tech-based, whether it's understanding how we assess and develop skills, it's whether it's how the early careers sector involved. There's a lot of stuff there for us to unpick. So I'm really pleased that both Robert and Nikki are able to join us today to talk that through. Nikki and Robert, would you like to introduce yourselves first for those that don't know you? Nikki, would you like to go first?
Thanks, Stephen. So Stuart's section was so brilliant, I have to say that first of all. But my name's Nikki Garchea. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO here at Capfinity. And Capfinity is an organisation providing skill solutions right from preparation through to development. And it's great to be here and lovely to be here with Robert, who I only just managed to touch on the shoulder yesterday as he ran through IHR. So lovely to see you, Robert.
Likewise, Nikki, and thanks for the handover. Likewise, I thoroughly enjoyed Stuart's presentation and can highly recommend Bristol too, because both my children went there and are in employment. So Bristol definitely somehow gets it right, even for my two. So really great to hear all the progress around that. But so Robert Newry, co-founder and now chief explorer at Arctic Shores, and my passion has always been about uncovering potential, and my belief around that is that you understand people better and more authentically if you learn about them and observe them from the way that they do something rather than the way that they might say they do something. And so I've developed over the last 10 years a task-based psychometric assessment. And we've worked with 350 or so different organizations, and 3 million or so candidates have been uncovered for 75,000 different jobs over that time.
Fantastic. Thank you, Robert. And I love your new job title. I'm very jealous.
Thank you.
So the format for this section, Robert, Nikki and I have gone through a few questions and topics that we're going to cover. So we'll do that in a kind of Q&A format. As in the last section, if you use the Q&A box, I've got that open on my monitor. If you see my eyes flicking sideways, that's what I'm looking at. So I'll try and kind of help host this conversation as well as keep an eye on those. So there'll definitely be time for questions for you as an audience as we go through. So can I start off with that first question to you, Nikki? And it kind of follows on from actually what one of the questions that I asked Stuart, and it's around this word skills. It's, it's a simple term, but covers deep, complex ideas about how people do their work, how we assess them, how people develop over time. What do you see changing about the way that we use skills across TA?
Thanks, Stephen. I think, first of all, I wholeheartedly, as you know, agree with the kind of three-pronged definition of there being behavioural skills, cognitive skills, and technical skills. And I think that that classification is really helpful for universities and organisations, just as a way to kind of bucket different skills in different ways. I think historically for early career talent acquisition, they have always been quite framework driven. I think a lot of people dialing into this webinar have wholeheartedly believed in that to get an ROI on why you would have an early career program, you need to know what you're measuring, you need to know how to then recruit on that basis and develop on that basis. So I think probably out of a lot of TA, the whole skills agenda probably is less new for early careers than it might be for other parts of organisations. I think the thing that is probably more emergent for certainly the early careers community is thinking about how they can use a concept like skills pathways. And I'm going to borrow HSBC as an example of this, where HSBC have taken an approach where they are essentially grouping jobs by skills in order to be able to put more jobs together and therefore both attract and recruit in a way that is simplified and also allows them to manage their talent pipeline in a way that they've got more flexibility. So if you take a role and a pathway in HSBC like digital, they're not solely recruiting for one role. They're looking for people who can all serve that digital skills pathway. And so I think some of the shift is actually not just in the creation of the frameworks, but actually the how do we use skills in order to solve a range of problems And some of those problems in recruitment have been one of, we have plenty of volume often. How do we get people through those pathways quicker? But also, how do we have more flexibility? So if I didn't just apply for one role, I'm out of the process because there are multiple things I am skilled for. So I think that's some of the transition we're seeing. It is not always popular then by the business who like a graduate attached to a specific role. And I think that's some of the challenge that we've got as we go forward with skills is there is a love of technical skills and there is a love of recruitment just for one job.
Got it. And when I talked at the very start of this around that pressures of demographic change, and then also just the changing and, you know, speed and complexity of work, because I'm not a recruiter anymore, I've not been for a number of years, I sometimes think, is this real? Is this actually true? And do you see those forces playing out? Is that's what's behind some of this move to a skills-based organization? It's not just, oh, you know, this has been dreamt up by a consultant and seems like a nice thing to do.
From a demographic perspective, Stephen, what do you mean specifically in terms of shortage of talent?
Yeah, shortage of talent. So organizations thinking, you know, yes, there's the whole graduate early careers piece, but it's not just about an 18-year-old or a 21-year-old coming into these programs. It's also about, so what I'm thinking about is, you know, those involved in early careers, emerging talent, actually having to think about a different demographic, because that's the reality of what the labour market is going to look like.
I think we probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago, saw more career changer programs attached to emerging talent than we do now. But I think people are getting there. And that is maybe partly driven by the shortage of kind of younger talent. But I think it's also, we've seen such great success where apprenticeships haven't capped that by having a certain number of kind of years of experience or having to have a degree. I think there's still work to do for graduate programs that people who haven't just graduated or haven't got kind of a couple of years of experience would feel like they could apply to those programs. I think we've probably got more success at apprenticeships. I think the reality is if we can discuss those skills, and I know, Robert, you and I kind of agree on this, that are more about kind of enabling foundational, the skills you can build other skills on top of, then we've got a much, much greater chance of bringing in any type of demographic and any type of population.
Right.
Robert, you've put your hand up. We must let you speak.
We must, yes. I'm trying to follow my script alongside, but
You're never going to follow your script with
I'm not, am I?
I mean, he's an explorer. My top skills adventure, Robert.
Right.
Thank you, Vicky. Well, I'm being sort of polite in the back of the classroom here and sticking my hand up, partly because I know, you know, I wasn't necessarily being asked to contribute in this bit, but Nikki, you know, I am so with you on this concept of foundational and what we call skill enablers on this, and I suppose that the quick point that I wanted to make on this is that, and your report talks about the trend is around skills-based organization, and I like what Stuart was saying. You know, this we keep using this word skills, and then it becomes employability skills, and there's been an assumption that because we're going to the skills-based organization, and that makes a lot of sense, that therefore we need skills-based hiring. And that for me is where it all falls apart, because actually what we need is to find people who we can then give the skills to, and there will always be some specific roles, neurosurgeons or financial directors, where they've got to have the specific qualified skills, but there's so many others where we're going to give them the skills, or they're going to acquire or learn them. And that's why I like this concept of emerging talent, because it's starting to get organizations to think about, okay, how do we find people who've got the capability to acquire skills? And that doesn't just have to be early careers. It could be transitioners, it could be returners. You know, suddenly then the whole talent pool opens up when you take that mindset of, you know, what are the things that enable somebody to acquire a skill?
I think one of the things, just to piggyback on that from what Robert said, and Stuart's doing this great job at Bristol, but I have people in my own kind of personal network who would love to do a career changer job. They would absolutely really want to be able to kind of come across into a different profession. When you're out of university, your access to knowing what skills might I have that are transferable, even what are my skills, is missing. And so I think if we are to go down the route of emerging talent, then there is also a need to, where do you go for your career support later on in your kind of life, in order to be able to feel ready to apply for those jobs that might suddenly be open to you. And a lot of the conversations I have with people who could be in those roles, they're saying to me, but I don't have the skills, I don't have the capabilities. And to Robert's point, that's why I think this enabling, this kind of skills that are foundational is so important, because otherwise we could get very specific with skills, and actually we won't de-skill, we will have people just simply not apply for those roles because they'll be seen as too specific.
Yeah, I get worried sometimes when I look at some of the, is it ONET in the States and some of the some stuff across Europe. I mean, it's great to have that mass data, but you kind of, when people are talking about thousands of skills being mapped, you kind of worry that's a bit unusual. One of the questions in the Q&A, and actually this was on the list I was going to ask you anyway, Nikki, was around, actually, do you want to just expand a bit more on what those foundational skills are? And I just guess put a bit of colour to that term. What are we thinking about when we talk about foundation skills?
So these are skills that essentially, from our perspective at Capfinity, and Robert will have a view as well in terms of his enabling skills, but our perspective at Capfinity, coupled with work that we did looking at CIBIL data, our own data, World Economic Forum data, is there are certain skills that nearly every single role requires, and therefore having them as a foundation will put you in a great position in order to have kind of flexibility to take on new skills and get trained, but also potentially do multiple roles in that organization. You can cut this by kind of new into work, but you could also cut it further up, and those skills might change slightly. So somebody with a bit more experience. But if I'm in early career, if I'm emerging talent, those skills are things like my capacity to collaborate, my capacity to have this critical thinking and analytical skill, learning agility, to be resilient, to be driven. These are consistent things that come up across multiple jobs. And that if you take something like resilience right now, it is such a key skill, as is things like learning agility, in order to navigate any role. And that can be a really strong foundation if you go into an organization, that you would navigate other jobs with that set. Now, if you've got a core to that, but you still then want to recruit for, say, investment banking, you could have some supplementary skills or motivation or attributes around the side of it. But there is a core quite often that would give organizations more latitude to have more movement, but arguably bring in more potential because it's not become so specific.
Got it.
Yeah, I would just so, and I'm seeing the same thing, and I'm with Nikki on things like resilience and learning agility. And I suppose just to answer the question directly on this, we see three. We've narrowed it down to three areas. So thinking style, which is a sort of combination of your cognitive ability and things like learning agility, your interaction with others, that's where things like collaboration come in, and then your self-management, how you like to work. And that's a little bit where resilience comes in. So we've just put it into those three core buckets, from which then there are all these sub elements from it.
Got it. And can I ask you, Rob, about about the role that data has to play in some of that thinking, or also more broadly in the way that we think about this whole topic, particularly in the relation to early careers, that early careers emerging talent sector. You know, we talk a lot about AI, but whether tech data is AI or not, what do you think are those key things that we need to be thinking about? I guess in twofold, partly how we operate as individuals in all the work that we do, but also about actually that pool of talent that we're hiring from.
Yeah, so there's a couple of issues around this. So first of all, just going back to some of the earlier points about if organizations are going skills based and then they're listing out for all their job descriptions the skills that are part of those job descriptions, what I'm seeing a lot of and I have a concern about is then organizations using tech and therefore data saying, oh, I've got a list of all these skills now that somebody's put in for their job description. And then I'm going to use a piece of tech to go out into the talent pool and find people who have also listed those skills within their capabilities. And it comes back to what Nikki was saying earlier. And I've seen it with my own daughter on this, where she wasn't sure whether to apply for a job for project management because she didn't believe that she had a project management skill. And yet she's just completed a PhD. And I was able to, talk her through, well, hang on, these are all the things that you've acquired by doing a PhD. And they are skills, if you listed them in there, that would then match you to all these jobs that actually you'd be very well set up and capable of doing. And so one of the biggest challenges we've got around data on this is this matching idea. And in principle, it sounds really, really interesting and effective. In practice, I think it's a disaster. And I noticed that the Department of Work and Pensions is being encouraged with all this sort of AI story from the government on this as to how do you use AI more, is that do we need career coaches in job centres anymore? Because actually we're just going to use AI for the jobs that are available and then see if we can match it to people coming into job centres with the skills that they list. And then we're going to very quickly find that there's no match going on there at all. So I think that it's a really, really important thing to understand is this how we're going to use data, how we're going to classify skills, how are we going to classify things like your potential that we were talking about to acquire a skill. Where does that fit in all of this? And then I think the second thing around where data and tech is going to come into this is the difference between how we make sure, which is worlds that Nikki and I come from of social science, how do we make sure that the data that we're using has been checked and verified that it's not introducing bias? And if you come from a social science world, you're constantly thinking, yes, I can see a correlation between data here, but how does that compare to a general population group? Or how does that data play out in a general population? And therefore, can we validate that the data that we're using around all of this is not introducing bias in some way? And so that difference between social science and data science is a really, really important one when we're thinking about, okay, how do we introduce data to make this matching that in theory sounds good in practice to deliver on that promise?
Do you find that there is sometimes this simplistic view, which is, well, if we just collate all the data and analyze it, there's the answer? It's kind of like there's that actually, yeah, this idea that data AI that has all the answers. As long as we do the collation bit and we get everybody's data, then actually, we can do some computational analysis and the data pops out, so we don't need to do much human thinking ourselves.
Well, that's right, and that's where the data companies are coming from on all of this. And you've only got to go back. You'll remember 2016, Amazon, and to be fair to them, they publicly declared this. They did a whole project on looking at their past hires and the CVs of their past hires to find out how that could predict who would be a good hire at Amazon, and therefore the type of people that they should be interviewing and sourcing. And surprise, surprise, when they look back through their historical data, it was men from a certain education and certain university. And then they realized, well, hang on, the training data around all of that was fundamentally flawed. And this is the danger as the sort of rush to AI again, is that we just think, oh, well, let's just put all this data into some sort of vast pool and then look and find through machine learning and various other techniques for correlations that a human wouldn't spot, and there's your silver bullet to some of our challenges, and of course it's much more sophisticated than that.
I've got a couple of questions because I'm conscious of time, so I'll ask it to you first, Robert, and then over to Nikki as well. Then Nikki also wants to come back on a question on strength. So if I ask this one first to you, Robert, and then Nikki, if you want to follow on afterwards, which is actually around part of what you're talking about. So linking that to the idea of foundational skills, and the actual question is foundational skills in relation to reasonable adjustments for something like neurodiversity. And yeah, I guess there's a bit about how do we think about those concepts, and are there any dangers, I guess, in using these broad, simplistic concepts, but then actually, problems in assessing those and accounting for that difference.
Yeah, and that's exactly my point about social science, and that's something that Nikki and I, as leaders of organisations that are acutely aware of being of bias and designing systems that mitigate and reduce that. I mean, that's what a good psychometric company will always be thinking about, and it's not something that is in the mindset of a data pure tech company. So I think it's hugely important that when we are designing these things and thinking about these things, that we are assessing and understanding diversity in all its forms, including neurodiversity. I think one of the final points that I would say about neurodiversity now is that we're starting to think about it in a much more nuanced way, and so the differences between dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, they can't just be bucketed into, oh, that's neurodiversity, so we just make a time adjustment. I think as we go forward, we need to be more sophisticated, and that's why I like the term thinking style, because if you think of it in terms of thinking style rather than just a cognitive skill, then suddenly the thinking style of somebody who's dyspraxic or dyslexic is different from somebody who's neurotypical, and in many ways that can be a real strength, that different approach in thinking style.
Great, thanks, Robert. So Nikki, do you want to just cover off those 2 points, and then that point and the strengths bit as well, and then we'll wrap up before we move on to Charlotte.
Yeah, I think from a skills perspective, one of the things from a neurodiversity but broader diversity perspective is to, and Stuart's doing a great job of this, describe the outcome, don't describe the route to get to the outcome. And that means that we can have multiple ways in which we can deploy an outcome, but we're not prescribing it. And I think that's really, really critical. That leads slightly into the strengths point, which from our perspective at Capfinity, obviously the strengths methodology has been kind of paramount for us for a number of years, shares a lot of principles with, I think, why people are interested now in skills. For us, the strengths piece comes in at the point of measurement. So a skill is a skill, but we don't know. Robert could have a skill, but we don't know if he's good or bad or indifferent at it. If we measure him and we look at whether he's motivated to deploy the skill and whether he can deliver it well, then it's very likely that Robert has that as a strength. If Robert is early career talent or emerging talent, changing roles, and he has got no experience, but he has got a heap of motivation, then he's got an unrealized strength in that skill. And so for us, the strengths piece comes when we're looking at skills proficiency, which allows people to still absolutely categorize and label and find a way of organizing their frameworks. But actually, one of the really critical bits is, does somebody actually want to deploy that skill, develop that skill over time? And that's where this kind of measurement comes in. And skills proficiency is probably one of the biggest untapped topics in this space.
Robert and Nikki, I'm going to have to cut you off there. I've just seen Charlotte's camera go on, so we stuck roughly 50% of the time to script, I think, which isn't bad for the three of us. And all these themes, as I said at the start, we are covering a lot of themes today. We're going to go into a lot more depth as the year goes on, and I'm sure you'll be coming back to these. So apologies also if I can't get to all the questions to get those covered off. But actually, if you guys got any time, there is some stuff in the chat that you may want to pick up. So Nikki, Robert, thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated. And actually,
thank you.
Thanks. One of the last questions in there actually was around companies wanting to recruit for skills, different talent pools, and the challenges of salaries, etc. And I think there's an area that we're going to go into, which is actually, which I hinted at the start, which is the skills-based organisation. Actually can sometimes sound relatively straightforward, but in practice really difficult to do. And there's all sorts of barriers as well as the positive upsides. So I'm really pleased to welcome Charlotte from Rolls-Royce, who's going to be talking to us about their journey. Charlotte, do you want to say hi and introduce yourself first of all?
Yeah, hi everyone. Charlotte Lloyd, Global Head of Future Talent and Skills at Rolls-Royce. From what I've heard so far, we've covered a lot, so I hope everyone's got a strong coffee for the last 30 minutes. So I've been asked today to talk to you about what it means to be move to a skills-based organisation here at Rolls-Royce, the journey we're on and where are we at so far, and then ultimately how that links into the emerging talent world. So I've got a couple of slides. Stephen, it's blocking me from sharing my screen, I think. So if someone can let me in, that'd be awesome.
Look. Seeing if Wally's there in the background. And the other option is
you should be able to share your screen now, because there's nothing else sharing at the moment.
Yeah, I've got it, but it's blurred out, so I can't share, unfortunately.
You might not have come in through a presenter link then. Could you email them to me, Charlotte?
Yeah, of course I can.
Why don't you email them to me?
And then while I do that, if there are any additional questions from the last session, you can carry on.
Cover those off. I won't share some stuff. What I'll do, I'll talk a little bit about what I was going to do at the end, which is what next, just while you send those through to me. Yes, as I said a couple of times already, the nature of a session like this, even though we're taking about an hour and a half, is relatively broad in scope. And one of the things that actually came through in the research we were doing on the skills-based organisation actually is it is very complex to deliver this. You'd have seen from the contributions from Robert and Nikki, and also from Stuart. When we're talking about large changes in the way people work, the way organisations think, there are all sorts of challenges within that. So I mentioned that question that came up last. Even just salary differentials when you're recruiting career changes. In some of the previous conversations, we've talked about whether people are coming onto apprentice programs. You have different age groups on the same apprentice program. Well, how does that work in practice? We did a senior session last year where we had a business leader talking about getting line managers actually being open to taking to people who might not have the same level of experience as others, being just really difficult and a really difficult barrier. So that's something again that we're going to go to much more in the year. So if we don't get time at the end, then a slide that I was going to show was actually how we're going to take this debate forward. So there's lots of subheadings. So anybody who's got content case studies that want to share that, please bring it through to us. We have got a WhatsApp group that we've set up, which will be up and running, and we'll be doing employer forums, or forums for all members around emerging talent. And we're also looking at the idea of creating a sort of working group, steering group for people that want to lead this conversation within the ISE. So we'll be coming back to yourselves for that as we roll through. I haven't seen your slide, Charlotte, yet come through to me. Let me just. Did you email them to me?
No, I emailed them to
Wally.
Yeah.
Have you got them, Wally? Do you want to share them?
The joy of tech.
That's great.
We talk about tech being an enabler for a lot of the things that we want to do, but it can also be a.
Still waiting on them. They haven't come true.
Okay. Stephen, let me send them to you as well, and then I'll make a start.
Yeah. Wally, is Charlotte on as a guest rather than a panelist?
She is down as a guest. No, as a panelist, I believe so.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I'll wait and see them come through. Charlotte, why don't I ask you questions?
Yes, she's down as a panelist.
Okay. All right. So we've got a problem with the tech.
Yeah, I can make a start, and as I'm talking, it's only 2 slides. So if anyone, in case anyone was nervous that I was about to do a 20-page slide deck.
Hold on,
Perfect.
Wally's got them, so I think can share them. Do you want to share them, Wally?
Fabulous.
Yes, one moment. I will just open them. Come on.
So no one wants to hear me drivel for 20 minutes without any imagery, right?
Okay.
You're underselling yourself, Charlotte.
Read and view. Okay, and here we go. Can everyone see that?
Brilliant.
Yay, there we go, at last. Marvelous.
Fabulous.
Right, just tell us when you want them moving forward, Charlotte.
Yeah, next slide, please. Fabulous. Perfect. So in the spirit of AI and playing with AI, this is an image that I generated to brain up what I thought some of the future could look like in my organization, and it spurted out this, and I thought I'd share that as part of the update. But essentially, a lot of people are calling it skills-based organization. I really like the term skill-powered organization because I think it really lends itself to kind of a future focus. How are we driving this approach to make real impact and real change? So I really like skills-powered as a way of describing it. But essentially, and I think a lot of people have touched on this today, that it's really imperative that we change how our organization, in particular Rolls-Royce, looks at the future of work in a new context. We know we need to be more flexible, more agile. We know technology is coming at a huge pace. And so we need to be bold in what we're doing if we really want to make some change. So we're absolutely on the journey to becoming a skills-based organization. And I guess we as a business really need to acknowledge that it really is a complete reimagining of how our organization is structured, and a mindset shift between the relationship of roles and people and business strategy and those traditional kind of hierarchical structures. So essentially, we want to move to a skills-based organization because we want to be more agile. We want to adapt to anything that comes our way, and we want to be future ready by focusing mainly on employees' skills and their capability to do a role, rather than those rigid job titles and those hierarchical structures which we so often see. So really the top box in terms of the characteristics talks about the fact that we really want skills to act as that foundation for connecting talent to work. So in order to do that, what we need to understand is what skills do we have in our organisation, so that we can start to focus on upskilling and building that employee capability, so that we can essentially deploy the right people at the right time in the right place. That's what it's all about in essence. But on top of that, the next layer is in fostering that culture of learning in the flow of work. So I think our director of learning talks very openly about the fact that traditional training, as we call it, is not going to work in the future, and we absolutely need to adapt a culture of that learning in the flow of work. How do I learn as I'm doing something? How do I skill myself as I'm doing a role, and continuously upskill and reskilling ourselves as we go along? Of course, growing our organisation means we need to access untapped talent. We know that there is a shortage of emerging talent out there, both internally and externally. So we need to look at how we can tap into that untapped talent pool. We need to create agility to do that, absolutely. And finally, we need to embrace that technology and that AI to help us get there quicker. Not in the instance of today's session, but get there quicker and adapt to those disruptors. So on the left-hand side, from a business perspective, we will build knowledge of what skills we have, so what capability do we have, where to best align those skills quickly to work, or tasks as we call them, anticipate those future skills gaps and proactively address them, and then match the right skills to the right tasks at the right time. And then from an employee perspective, what that will feel like is if we can get to a place where Skills are that currency of work in the organisation. What it then does is open up Rolls-Royce or your organisation to a whole career, a whole squiggly career, as I think that the word is that we're using at the moment. It breaks down those perceived barriers of organisational design, linear career paths, and really opens up the whole of the business for a squiggly career. Next slide, please. So where are we at? So I talked about the fact that we need to understand the skills that we have and our capability. And I know in the previous session, we talked a lot about data playing a really key part in that. So this is a slide I threw together to try and explain how all of the mechanisms feed into each other from a skills-powered organisation perspective. And you'll see here on the left-hand side, we talk a lot about enterprise skills data. That's what we've spent the last couple of years really building internally, is what is our skills data, and then validating it. So Nikki talked about the fact that we need to validate skills and understand almost the strengths of individuals. So a lot of work is now going into validating our skills. But alongside that, and Stephen, you mentioned it right at the beginning of this session, that a key to a skills-based organisation is looking at strategic workforce planning with the S. A lot of people, I think, are really great at operational resource planning, which is looking at, your 3 to 5 year plan, what work needs to be done, and therefore what people do we need. But when we look at strategic workforce planning, it's understanding and having a guess ultimately what our future state could look like, and therefore what skills and capabilities do we need in order to enable that. So the right-hand side of this picture is very much about understanding our business strategy and ultimately the business plans that support that. Understanding that work that needs to be done in the form of tasks, understanding our human skills through data and validation, and then getting a really good grasp, therefore, on what our skills gaps are. So for an emerging talent perspective, when we have a skills gap, the strategy naturally would look at what do we build, which feeds the learning strategy, what do we buy and borrow, which feeds our talent strategy, and ultimately what do we bot. So how is technology going to act as an enabler for this? So if I focus on the buy element, because essentially that's the link to emerging talent here, is the traditional approach, I think, to long-term talent planning is very much structured around early careers programs. So building that capability at the beginning of people's professional journeys. But we've really tried to challenge that approach at Rolls-Royce, because in essence, what we're doing is limiting our potential to attract and build a much larger and diverse talent pool more broadly. So essentially forgetting about a whole chunk of talent out there on the market. So I'm talking about career changer programs, I'm talking about career and alumni and returner programs, really looking at programs that are designed to support individuals who are re-entering the workforce after an extended break, or they want to change careers. So the aim is to bridge the gap in skills and experience, providing that supportive environment and refreshing abilities and building confidence, essentially. So we internally therefore refreshed our language and rebranded our team from early careers to emerging talent to reflect this collective approach that we're trying to drive. And I know that features in the latest report, Stephen. It doesn't stop there essentially though, because there are generational factors that play into this as well. And I think it's the first time that we've got, between 5 and 6 generations working in the workplace at one time. So we know that Gen Z and Gen Alpha want a different experience from the workplace. A job for life is no longer appealing to them. They want diversity. They want that squiggly career. They don't want to look up and think that's my career trajectory. So if we don't start to meet their expectations, we're not only going to lose them as talent, but we probably wouldn't even attract them in the first place. We also know that they're not feeling confident about entering the workplace. And I've seen a lot of questions that have come up today in the other sessions around how do we help bridge that gap between education and the workplace? And that's what we're really trying to challenge here internally at Rolls-Royce, is how do we approach the programs that we have on offer, but also broadly than that, how do we start to challenge and almost disrupt the education system? The length of degrees, the content, how do they experience and apply their knowledge while they're learning? So I just wanted to end on a couple of pieces of activity that we've got in flight to almost support that concept. And a few of you may have seen that we launched a new degree programme in partnership with Derby University last month, BSc in International Business and AI. And this is really about challenging the length of a degree, but also almost marrying it up with a traditional graduate programme, so that we're reducing the length of time that someone is building and taking in their knowledge. And we're helping them with integrating industry projects, mentorship, experiential learning into the curriculum. We're helping them bridge that gap between classroom theory and I guess the demands of the workplace and the work that they'll roll off and do. So reducing the traditional time spent on a degree, enabling students to gain those practical skills alongside the academic knowledge, so that they can have impact faster when they take on their first role. The second programme, and this was launched yesterday, is a brand new programme as part of our emerging talent strategy, really designed to develop future ready skills at pace. So our Enterprise Skills Accelerator programme is designed for all graduates, recent graduates, career changers, alumni, all of that good stuff. It's not a traditional graduate scheme. It's about offering an experience for people that are really looking to have a non-traditional route out of university. And I think Nikki touched on it as well, stop linking programs to a specific job. So again, the program is aimed at giving people the right skills for future roles that aren't necessarily created or defined yet, but giving them almost those foundational skills to be successful in the workplace. But essentially, we're on a journey. We haven't tackled it all yet, but this is how we're starting to tackle it. But essentially, it's focusing on skills and capability over job title and tenure, focusing on culture of learning in the flow of learning in the flow of work, the ability to learn, unlearn, relearn continuously, creating agility in our system so that we can essentially attract and develop the people with the right skills, with the right mindset, so that they can be successful and have impact. And I'll stop there because that was a lot.
Charlotte, that was great. Thank you very much. Wally, you can start sharing the slides now. We've got a couple of questions in the chat that I'll come to, but I was going to start off with one actually, and you and I have spoken about this in the past. It's interesting that it's an engineering organisation thing. That I've never worked for an engineering business, but I've always assumed that actually it's a very sort of siloed, almost hierarchical environment, because the complexity of the work people do. So it's funny, if I'd automatically think other sectors would embrace this kind of thinking before Rolls-Royce. So my question is actually, what is the big business driver, and actually how are the business engaged in this? Because I think from what you told in the past, this is very much being led from the top. This is seen as an essential thing to do, not a nice thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely, it's being led from the top. I think, and you're right, it's interesting that we tackled it with our engineers first, but essentially the business problem, so to speak, is that we had, prior to our current CEO, we had what we called empowered businesses. So we had defence, we had civil, and we had power system business that essentially all acted in silos. We have now moved to an enterprise approach. And with that, what we found is that we did have an internal skills crisis looming, particularly in the engineering space. But what we found was we had enough across the organisation to plug those skills gaps. They were just sitting in different places. So Rolls-Royce took the bold decision actually to take 14,000 engineers out of those business areas and put them into one division, which we now call ET&S. So all of those engineers have come out of the businesses, sit almost in like a talent pool, and we deploy them based on their skills to the work that needs to be done. So essentially by doing that, we've not had to go out and recruit external people, but also what we've now done is essentially fixed our own internal skills crisis and are comfortable that for a certain length of time we have the skills and the resource we need to deliver the work that we know needs to be done. So actually our move to a skills-based organisation happened structurally before any of the other programs followed. So that's essentially how we started it.
Got it. I'm sure there must have been some resistance. How did you overcome that resistance of, I don't know, I mentioned it before, line managers willing to think in this way or hire in this way or develop in this way?
I think it all comes down to, from a business perspective, if we have a really good understanding of where all our skills are, in totality rather than do they sit in each individual hierarchical structure, it opens up a huge talent pool internally, because we can start to find people in other areas of the business that have the skills that we need and move them quickly to the tasks that need to be done. From an employee perspective, I think I alluded to this earlier, but essentially it allows people to navigate a squiggly career. It means that people aren't joining a role at Rolls-Royce and thinking, I've got to look upwards when I think of career progression. And naturally, there's a whole plethora of people, and the research is suggesting that people actually want to change careers throughout their life. And unless we start to open up the company and have squiggly careers and enable that mobility and give people examples and opportunities to look sideways rather than upwards, we're going to lose that talent. So it's a double-edged sword. People want to have squiggly careers and develop themselves, but actually if we don't do that, we'll lose in many ways talent. So I think it's important that we create that agility and those learning opportunities.
Great. Just going to some of the questions that are in the Q&A. So I had a question actually around that squiggly careers piece, and this is from Victoria, and it's relation to young people. Is there a challenge in explaining that to young people coming through? Again, I'm particularly thinking about engineering, where there is actually a strong link between what you study and what you do. You know, are there challenges in helping those students understand actually the importance of those broader skills that we're talking about alongside their technical expertise? And if there are, how do you overcome those?
Yeah, great question. And I think Robert alluded to it earlier, that there's absolutely a place for people that want a structured career, and engineering potentially is one of those. But I think we've always done it in that way, haven't we? And where we've got a younger generation who want a different work experience, they no longer have the mindset of I live to work and a job is for life. If we continue on that trajectory where we see careers as very linear, we're not going to attract that younger generation of talent. So there is absolutely roles and careers where you would look upwards, and there's people out there that again will look upwards for a career and want to manage people and want to be the next CEO. But there's not a plethora of CEO positions. But what there is a plethora of squiggly careers where people can have varied experiences and still earn more money and still progress and get that career progression, but just in a non-traditional way. But I think absolutely there's a space for people that would absolutely want fixed linear careers. But I think the majority, and I was one of them, I came out of uni and didn't know what I wanted to do. I studied a subject that I loved and I enjoyed, but I had no idea what I wanted to do growing, when I'm older. I still don't, and I will navigate that with the skills that I have. I don't have a clear career path, and I would hope that I'm in a business that would allow me to be squiggly and experience and explore other avenues if that's something that I want, but have a clear process to go upwards in a linear fashion if that's what I desire as well.
Not to cover here, but I think it's something we're definitely going to cover later in the year, because I think this idea of how you manage your career is going to come back into the learning and development proposition, because yes, there are skills in themselves that help you navigate that. But I don't want to deflect too much away from the Q&A that's coming through. There's a couple of questions here that are, I think, on the same trajectory, and I guess it's around some of the technical barriers to making this happen. And we alluded to it earlier. It's people are at different pay rates at different levels in their careers, and that might be a barrier to people transitioning through. You probably have some roles that actually you do need degree, PhD level technical expertise to do some of the work. And that might be a barrier to some people coming through. So how do you navigate some of those more technical? Because I guess they're more relevant to somebody who has got experience, who has got a few more years in work under their belt. Or they're still in the difficult box that you're trying to work out.
We definitely still figure skills-based reward is definitely something that we are trying to tackle. It's almost it ultimately answers the so what. Why would I choose to upskill myself? Why would I choose to go and undertake that gig or help with that project? And it's definitely something that does possess a challenge, particularly for Rolls-Royce, where we're so heavily unionised also. But it absolutely will form part of the skills-based journey. Is in a world where, in my opinion, you've almost got three buckets of employees. You've got employees that are in fixed roles that will have a fixed salary, potentially a fixed bonus because they do a fixed job. And those tend to be the types of people that would maybe work in a shop floor environment where the job doesn't change considerably over the years. You then, on the other end of the spectrum, got your deep technical experts. I think this is what you alluded to in terms of the PhD. Let's use an example of cyber, for example. We'd have a handful of people that would be very, very technical expert in what they do, that again, their role is very specific. And what we'd like to do within a skills-based organisation is understand how would we undertake that knowledge transfer from that person to others. But I would see the majority of people in the future of work undertaking a series of projects as part of their job, which is why I think job titles will become outdated, because actually I think we're all operating in that way now anyway. You have a job title, but you'll do lots of different projects, reporting to different people as part of that. So how do we reward that big chunk of people in the middle for upskilling themselves and utilising that skill in the business? And that's what we're currently trying to navigate at the moment, is outside of a fixed salary and a bonus payment and all that good stuff. How do you incentivize people for upskilling and acquiring a skill and then using that in a business context and having impact? So yeah, it's definitely something that we're figuring out.
Sure. We'll all have job titles like Robert that we alluded to earlier, which would be a great development, actually. One last question, then I'm conscious that we're over time already, and it actually is one that links, actually, it's been a bit of a thread running through all the conversations today, and that is around actually data on skills, where you get it from, how you use it. Is there anything you can share on what kind of skills data you are collecting, how you might use it, how you might validate it? I know there's products out there like Eightfold Path, Gloat, that I haven't got much experiences of yet, but that purport to offer some of these solutions. So yes, so the question is kind of what kind of skills of data are you collecting, and how do you validate it, use it?
So we're again, people are tackling it all different ways. A lot of people have decided to go and buy off the shelf skill taxonomies to enable them to go a little bit quicker. We have taken an employee first approach. So we're driving our skills data through our employees. Naturally, that sometimes can take a little bit longer, but from our perspective, that has the longevity. And I'll explain. If you are empowered to tell us what your skills are and you're constantly relearning and upskilling, you're more likely to keep that data up to date, because you want to tell us, the skills that you've acquired and how you want to use them. So for us, it's employee driven. We've got some really great tech where people add their skills into the system. They also add their skills interests, and their skills interests tell us, this is a skill I want to develop in. And our system will then kick the right learning, suggest mentors, gig opportunities, job opportunities automatically their way based on their skills interests. From a skills validation perspective, what we're doing now into 2025, that's the key focus for me, is validating those skills. And that again is an employee first approach. An employee will validate their skills, and so will their manager or an SME in the business, so that you've almost then have that two-way conversation where there's potential gaps, and where you have a then sensible conversation with your manager about upskilling yourself. So for us, it's an employee first approach. We're asking employees to self-serve the skills that they have, and then 2025 we're looking to validate them. I'm hoping that answers the question, but if anyone wants to reach out to me specifically on anything, happy to do that as well.
Well, that's great, Charlotte. And that data piece and technology, that's something we're definitely going to be coming back to and doing another session like this on in more detail. Charlotte, thank you much for sharing. I really do appreciate it. I know you as well as also out and about today, so being able to squeeze this in is very much appreciated.
No worries,
so
thank you.
Thanks a lot, Charlotte. And thanks to all our speakers. So thanks to Stuart, thanks to Robert, thanks to Nikki. Great sharing today. I've just got a couple of slides I'm going to share just to finish off, just really to talk about what's next on this agenda. What now? So what is the IT going to be doing next with this? This report really is a kind of state of the nation of where we think are at, but also a marker for where we want to go in the future. So throughout the year, we're going to have webinars, podcasts, conference content, exploring all these themes in more detail, because it really does cut right across all our members and all the work that we do within early careers. I should say that the phrase emerging talent, I did nick that from from both Charlotte's work at Rolls-Royce, but also HSBC. They are two teams that have used that phrase, so it wasn't our creation. But I think it's a good indication of where our sector is going. So we are going to be producing more resources, more reports, more case studies. If you go onto the ISE site, go onto the Knowledge Hub, that's where that information will be going. If you're interested in being part of a working group that's going to help us develop this, because obviously actually what we need to do is surface actually what all of you as organizations are doing, whether you're solution providers, employees, or whether you're in the education space. And also if you're an ISE member, you probably know about our WhatsApp groups, which are very lively forums for people to engage with. There is now an emerging talent WhatsApp group that we've only just launched, so please feel free to join with that. So that's everything from all of us. You will get a recording. You will get a link to the recording by email, so you can go back and visit this. I'm conscious it was a much longer session than normal. We'll also have a blog piece coming out capturing some of the information on this, and as I said, please do go and have a look at that report which we launched today, which is on the website. But any questions, any comments, if you want to get in touch with any of the speakers, please feel free to come through with me. Enjoy the rest of the day, everybody. If you're anything like me, it's now time for some lunch, so take care. Talk to you all soon. Bye now.